Thanks for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm Gary Lane. Today, gas prices hitting a new high as President Biden is set to talk to the country about inflation. But he's faced criticism from Democratic economists. And we'll talk to our CBN News financial editor, Drew Parkhill, about rising prices. Supreme Court justices and their families are getting more protection as protests grow over the apparent reversal of Roe v. Wade. Those stories and more today on CBN Newswatch. Plus, he's the first ambassador from Israel to the nation of Bahrain. In an exclusive interview with CBN News, he explains why his position is helping to prove to the Middle East and the world that the Jewish state can work together with its neighbors.
Establish relationship between Israel and Arab countries, and not just that, it's proving to the rest of the Arab countries, to the rest of the world, and to the rest of the people in this region that it is possible.
Also, we'll hear his country's concerns about a possible nuclear deal with Iran. And with the CDC warning of 100 million new COVID infections, now dogs are being trained to test large numbers of people for COVID in a short amount of time. And prayer played a key role in bringing it about.
So I mulled it over and prayed over it and led by the Spirit. And the team that you're going to meet here in a little while, we got our heads together and said, here's the methodology we would probably use.
You'll see how this amazing process works at a time when America really needs it. Those stories and more today on CBN Newswatch.
This is CBN Newswatch.
We begin with already high gas prices. They're ticking up even higher. Food, housing, and car prices are spiking too. President Biden is expected to address the growing crisis today in a speech from the White House. CBN's Jenna Browder has that story from Washington.
Americans are feeling it in the pocketbook with gas prices at an all-time high and other basics like food spiking. The president knows it's a problem he needs to get out in front of in an election year. According to AAA, the national average for a gallon of regular is now $4.37, up 23 cents from last month and a new record high. Some analysts predict an average price as high as $4.50 a gallon by summer. And it's not just gas. According to the latest Consumer Price Index report, food at-home prices have risen 10% in the last 12 months, marking the largest 12-month increase since 1981. Prices for meat and eggs increased more than 13% over the last year, while beef rose 16%. What's more, the USDA predicts grocery store prices will jump another 5 to 6% this year. And on Wall Street, stocks deepened their losses on Monday, sending the S&P 500 to its lowest close in more than a year.
The president will be speaking to his plan, his continued plan to continue the fight to address inflation in the coming months.
President Biden is expected to address the growing crisis today at the White House. The speech to highlight steps he's taken to help American consumers, like releasing oil from the strategic reserve, and contrasting it with Republican proposals. Even some Democrats, including President Bill Clinton's Secretary of Treasury Larry Summers, say the Biden administration's big spending packages increase the surge in inflation. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki taking this pointed question from a reporter.
As we look ahead to tomorrow's inflation speech, let me ask you to look back at some of the warnings that were issued last year by Summers and Ratner and so on. In retrospect, were they right that some of the government policies were going to lead to inflation?
I wouldn't say we agreed with them then, and we don't agree with them now.
And President Biden's speech comes just one day before a key inflation report is released. One prominent analyst believes it will show the rate of inflation last month was below the 8.5% rate we saw in March, an indicator inflation may have finally peaked. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
With us now is our CBN News financial editor, Drew Parkhill. Drew, the White House says they don't agree with economists who warn that there'd be a surge in inflation. So who's right?
Well, obviously, the Democratic economists who warned about this were absolutely right. You know, Democrats might have poo-pooed this, but Jason Furman, who worked with the Obama economic team, he surveyed price increases around the world, including the United States, and we have much higher inflation here. What was the difference? The huge stimulus money. And that's what he attributes our higher inflation to. And Steve Ratner, who is also an Obama economic advisor, said This is Biden's inflation, and he needs to own it. So their warnings came to pass, and now because of government spending, that's what made high inflation much higher.
Wow, so that stimulus money really made a difference. People are thinking, wow, I'm getting free government money, but they're paying now.
Yeah, guess what? Everybody's paying now. That's the big thing.
Yeah, so war in Ukraine, rising crime. So what effect has that had on inflation?
Well, inflation is, the war in Ukraine has made it a little worse. You can't say it's Putin's price hike, but inflation is the #1 political issue because it affects everybody. The White House talks about job growth. Well, that's nice, but that may be somebody down the street. You, on the other hand, are going to the gas pump and you're seeing record gas prices. You're going to the grocery store. You're seeing high food prices. It affects the middle class. It affects people of lower incomes. It really affects even higher income people who have to deal with businesses expenses. So it affects everybody. And people, when prices are going up and your salary's not going up as much, your standard of living is going down. That's why it's the #1 issue.
Yeah, much more extensive than just unemployment, right? It affects, as you say, everyone.
Yeah.
So what about the stock market? Took another big hit on Monday. What do you expect will happen now?
It's going to take a while to work through this. I mean, I have been expecting the market to go down, so it's going to take a while to work through this. But it's not. This isn't going to last forever. Eventually, I mean, we may have a slowdown. We might have a recession. It's hard to say. But there's no question that we'll work through this. I expect in the second half of this decade, stock prices will be going way up and we'll be doing a lot better than what we are now. Expect for the Dow to go over 100,000 within 10, 12 years or so.
Okay, our CBN News financial editor, Drew Parkhill, thank you for being with us. The Senate has passed a measure to beef up security for Supreme Court justices and their families to make sure that they're being protected as the court deliberates whether to overturn Roe v. Wade. The bipartisan bill passed by voice vote with no objections. The measure makes certain the 9 justices are provided security as some protesters have gathered outside their homes. The bill now moves to the House for its consideration. Protests have erupted in front of the Supreme Court building and around the country after a leaked draft opinion suggested a majority of conservatives on the court are prepared to reverse the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision and once again let states decide on their own abortion laws. Well, turning to the war in Ukraine, Russia has pounded away at Ukraine's vital southern port city of Odessa. That's according to Ukrainian officials, who also announced they found the bodies of 44 civilians in the rubble of a building in the northeast that was destroyed weeks ago. The port came under repeated missile attack, including from some hypersonic missiles, after Russia marked its biggest patriotic holiday without giving new information about the war. The Ukrainian military earlier said Russian forces fired 7 missiles from the air at Odessa, hitting a shopping center and a warehouse. Well, with the brutal battles underway in Ukraine, refugees continue to pour into Eastern European countries, mainly Poland. CBN's Operation Blessing is there to help them and provide them with much-needed food.
Operation Blessing is here in Poland. We're still, after 7 weeks of war, we're still here, blessing the people of Ukraine that is escaping the war. Today, we're here in this industrial kitchen that God provided to us to start cooking hot meals. This has been such a blessing for people that has been walking for days, hours waiting at the queue, at the line in the Ukrainian side. Right now, this is the border. The food truck is behind me, and our volunteers and workers are here on the ground serving hot meals. Thank you for your donations, for your prayers for our brothers in Christ in Ukraine. We're going to keep working here at the border for the Ukrainian people. Thank you.
And you can help Operation Blessing in their disaster relief efforts. Call 1-800-700-7000. Say you want to give to the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund. And you can write to us at CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. Just put Disaster Relief Fund in the memo line of your check. And you can text us. Just text OB Crisis to 71777. Or you can go to our websites at cbn.com or Operation Blessing at ob.org. And anything you can do to help will be appreciated. Well, coming up, he holds a position that didn't exist until recently. In fact, almost no one would have thought it was even possible. He's Israel's first ambassador to the Arab nation of Bahrain. We'll hear why he says it's important to show how Israel can work in peace with its Arab neighbors and why prayers are welcome for the region. We'll have that story up next. 2 years ago, his position didn't exist, and few people would have even thought it was possible. But now Israel has its first ambassador to Bahrain, and it's a direct result of the Abraham Accords peace agreements. Chris Mitchell brings us this from CBN News' exclusive interview with Ambassador about the historic changes happening in the Middle East.
Few people have witnessed the dramatic transformation in the Middle East Gulf states, like Eitan Naeh, Israel's first ambassador to Bahrain.
I saw 2 Israeli embassies open in the Gulf, one in the UAE, one in Bahrain, a consulate general that was opened in Dubai, dozens of agreements that were signed.
From the birth of the Abraham Accords on the White House lawn, Ambassador Naeh has been a key player in the agreements.
They are a significant, in fact, historical change to the course of events in the Middle East. They are an effort to take a road that has not been taken before, establish a relationship between Israel and Arab countries, and not just that, it's proving to the rest of the Arab countries, to the rest of the world, and to the rest of the people in this region that it is possible.
But about 100 miles from Manama, the capital here in Bahrain, and across the Gulf, lies Iran and its regime that represents an existential threat, not only to Israel, but to this tiny Gulf country. Ambassador Naeh says the Gulf countries see the Iranian nuclear deal just like Israel does.
We hear from them exactly what we say. I think that the threat and the threat perception, the threat levels are pretty identical by those who live in this region, by those who experience the kind of behavior that Iran got infamous for. And the threat, the concern is real. We all know that the mother of all problems in the Middle East is Iran. All we have to do is to watch the news.
CBN News met with the ambassador during a visit of a delegation of evangelical Christian leaders to Bahrain and the UAE, led by Joel Rosenberg. During our time in Manama, violence continued to rock Jerusalem's Temple Mount. Ambassador Naeh explains the rioting is nothing new.
In the 30s, amid a wave of Jewish immigration to then mandatory Palestine, running away from Hitler, just prior to the Second World War, and what the Palestinian leader then, Haj Amin al-Husseini, saw as Arab indifference, he came up with the idea of how to attract attention, and Al-Aqsa was the answer. The Jews are threatening Al-Aqsa. He disseminated this fake news, they didn't call it then fake news, but lie, and it caught fire. And it is still catching fire.
He says the rocks being thrown are not just at Israeli police and Jewish worshippers at the Western Wall.
But they're really thrown at the Abraham Accords. I asked our viewers, your viewers, to really zoom out from just this event and say, look, they're doing it for the second year since the Abraham Accords were signed in order to derail the Abraham Accords.
Ambassador Naeh points to the media's impact in the region.
A peace process cannot advance without the public opinion. And the public opinion here in the region is being influenced by other media outlets that disseminate lies, fake news, and the role of the media is to really show the truth uncut, to show the truth, to give the full picture, and to explain to people what we're trying to do here. And that is an immensely important.
Naeh also says they welcome prayers from Christians around the world.
Yes, we need those prayers, we need this help, we need those people who can to come and visit, to see in their own eyes that a new reality is being born. And those among our viewers who have business in the Middle East, come and do business with Israel, with Bahrain, with the UAE, bring people together and still pray for the peace of Jerusalem and the region.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Manama, Bahrain.
Still ahead, man's best friend now has a new calling to help test people for COVID. We'll tell you how it works, how prayer helped to bring it about, and why it's so important right now when we come back. Centers for Disease Control is warning of another 100 million COVID infections this fall and winter. So accurate testing is extremely important. Now man's best friend is helping out. Dogs are being trained to test large numbers of people for the virus in a short amount of time. Mark Martin brings us the story of the Virginia company training canines in the fight against COVID.
Oh, you want to play. Oh, you want to play.
Instructor James Overton plays with Blade, a German Shepherd Belgian Malinois mix. The 3-year-old is one of dozens at American Canine Interdiction, a Virginia company that says it has real-world canine solutions. Paul Ruscia has led efforts here for 18 years.
Primarily what we do, we take dogs and we condition them to find explosives, narcotics, bed bugs, and COVID. If it has an odor, we can train the dog to find it.
These dogs, they never cease to amaze us. I don't think we deserve these dogs. I think their capabilities, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of the things that these dogs are able to do for us.
Ruscia says the idea to train dogs to detect COVID came after hearing a competitor discuss the concept.
So I mulled it over and prayed over it and led by the Spirit. And the team that you're going to meet here in a little while, we got our heads together and said, here's the methodology we would probably use. So we went with a cheek swab. We didn't use urine, we didn't use sweat, we didn't use the protein molecules. We went with an actual sample from the mouth, pretty much like the SNAP test, if you will.
So we partnered with the hospitals, and they were able to get us samples from people that were currently being treated for COVID-19. We got the cheek swabs from them, and then what we ended up doing is training the dogs to recognize the smell of the cheek swab first.
After that, Overton says they introduced the dogs to the smell of a person's saliva without COVID.
We got the dogs to discriminate between the smell of somebody infected versus not infected with an astonishing accuracy rate.
It's just remarkable how sensitive their olfactory capabilities are and their ability to find this stuff. It's north of 95% accurate.
Andrew Casekamp is in charge of training and education.
I was actually one of the skeptics. I said, there's no way. There's no way. I've done this a long time. I do not believe that it's possible, and I'm kind of glad that they proved me wrong. You know, watching them actually go out and have the accuracy that they have is astounding.
One of the primary benefits for using dogs to detect COVID is speed. Staff here say a dog can screen 30 to 40 people in less than a minute, compared to it takes around 15 minutes to get the results back on just one rapid antigen test. Casekamp and his 3-year-old Dutch Shepherd Pashka demonstrate how it works, while Overton breaks it down for us.
So what this system does is does a couple things. One, it prevents the dog from actually being able to get the sample. So you'll see this little filter inside of here that actually prevents the dog from being able to stick his nose all the way in and grab the sample out. But what it also does is it also focuses that odor right here into the edge of the funnel. So when you see it later, when the dogs come in, the dog will come in here and stick his nose inside the funnel, able to get that concentrated area of odor right here. And then, you know, if it's a positive sample, then the dog would alert. Otherwise, he'll keep on going.
For our test, Overton uses a neutral odor that was used to train the dogs in the initial training, not an actual virus. As you can see, Pashka alerts by sitting down in front of the target tube.
So if this were a real-world situation, the dogs would come in here. Each tube system would be labeled so that we know whose sample is which one. With our barcode system that we have in our app, they would come in here. If the dog indicates on this one, then this tube gets flagged as this was one of the hot tubes.
Overton believes the dogs are a match for searching large groups of people.
Anywhere where there's large crowds of people in close proximity to each other. So cruise ships, stadiums, concert venues, schools, hospitals, anywhere, even the airlines, any of those applications would be perfect for something like this.
Ruscia says he prays over the dogs constantly and relies on divine intervention.
I ask for that knowledge, wisdom, and discernment on a daily basis. And then just trust the prompting of the Holy Spirit. You know, go find that quiet space. The world's loud, and God likes to whisper. So I like to just go find that quiet little space and wait for his prompting. And if he tells me go forward with it, I do. And if he speaks to my heart and says don't do that, then I don't.
And adds, at the end of the day, his work is all for God's glory. Mark Martin, CBN News, Cartersville, Virginia.
Coming up, Regent University holding its first in-person graduation in 3 years, with the Virginia governor and lieutenant governor both speaking to the graduates, along with Regent founder and chancellor Pat Robertson. We'll hear what they had to say when we come back. Stay with us. Regent University celebrated its first in-person graduation this weekend since 2019 here on the CBN campus. And Virginia's newly elected governor, Glenn Youngkin, delivered the keynote address. Take a look.
Thousands of students and their families gathered on Saturday to celebrate Regent University's class of 2022. They were joined by 500 2021 and 2020 graduates who took part in virtual ceremonies those years. Regent University's 43rd graduating class is the largest one to date, 2,500 strong from all its graduate and undergraduate programs. This year's keynote speaker was Virginia's newly elected governor, Glenn Youngkin.
So here's what I believe. Seek your purpose, and you will find happiness. Seek happiness, and you will find neither. So remember who you are, which way your compass points, and remember who claims you, a holy and loving God.
Well known for Christian vision and excellence, Regent offers 150 online and on-campus fields of study. The class of 2022 drew students from 49 states and 19 countries, while Regent has more than 30,000 alumni. Regent's Alumnus of the Year was Virginia's Lieutenant Governor, Winsome Sears.
You are here to glorify Him. I want you to remember this. Don't lose yourself. Don't lose your family.
Founder and Chancellor Dr. Pat Robertson left the graduates with this charge.
You are going to stand because the Bible is filling your heart, and God has chosen each one of you for such a time as this.
Then, the moment everyone had waited for.
You may now flip your tassels.
Well, that's it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our CBN News programs on the CBN News channel at any time or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories that you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Or talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we hope you'll join us next time. Have a great and blessed day.